I know you and I talked about this yesterday because I always say when you come into it, it's people, process, and technology. So
Right, right.
when I first came into that, we fired a few people right off the bat. So there were some people that weren't connected with the change that we were going to do, which was
Okay,
tough.
I'm glad you brought that up because this is a key foundation to change. And it sounds brutal,
Yeah.
but I've noticed it in my own life when I've come in and tried to make change. If I did not root out the culture keepers, the people that would not change and wanted things to stay the same, they torpedoed every single change I tried to make. Welcome to Embracing Digital Transformation, where we investigate effective change leveraging people, process, and technology. This is Darren Pulsford, Chief Solution Architect, author, and most importantly, your host. On this episode, Embracing Change, Turning Organizational Resistance into Opportunity, with special guest Ken Gavranovic, author, visionary, and strategic advisor. Ken, welcome to the show.
Darren, thanks so much for having me.
Hey, Ken, when we talked, I was like, man, this would be great to have you on the show. And you booked me the next day. So this is nice. This is nice and fresh, our conversation that we had just yesterday. So I'm really excited to get into this with my audience. But before we do that, everyone that listens to my show knows that I only have superheroes on the show. And every superhero has a background story. Because you got to know the background story to know who you're listening to. So, Ken, what's your superhero background story?
Oh God, the superhero, that's big. So let me see if I can jump into that. But maybe I'll go because I know we're talking about digital transformation, and I actually think like digital transformation and business transformation has a lot to do with people and how people think about things. So I'll just share, like, I started off as, grew up in kind of a tough neighborhood, like one of those, situations in childhood where it created lots of stimulus, not necessarily great stimulus for the central nervous system. But I didn't really realize that was the beginning of my superpower, because what that made me is very motivated to achieve, to get out of the situation that I grew up as a child. And so, started with businesses, and, I started off like you. I think you said that you were a developer.
Software engineer.
Yeah. And I love the idea. I actually remember seeing the movie War Games, and it wasn't because of War Games like is violent or anything like that, but I just love the concept of I can sit in a room and dream up things and change the world. And so I saw that movie and then started doing, teaching myself software development, started off and making a lot of other people. In my early 20s, I made multiple people tens of millions of dollars, but I wasn't smart enough to make sure some of that
yourself
came my way, So did that for a while, did my stint in Texas and New York and Florida. But I eventually came upon this thing called the internet, right? And I was in my 20s, and it was kind of still beginning. Everybody was investing in dial-ups. And I was like, the bigger business is hosting, because everybody's going to get a website. Every business is going to have one in time. Yeah. And so I started a company and moved to Atlanta, because at that point, think about it, in our house, we all have like 100 meg. I have gig connections. Back then, there was only a 45 meg connection to the internet to all of South Florida. So I moved to Atlanta, took all of my savings, rented half of a building in downtown Atlanta, and started a company called Interland that then became web.com. Took it from you and I are putting our desks together to IPO public. So that was, one fun experience. Fast forward to a couple others, and then we'll dive into the conversation. Came to a company called Cox. Maybe you've heard of Kelly Blue Book, Auto Trader, all of those things. And when I joined, the way they built software was like on spreadsheets and, very old practices. I came in
old school.
Oh, very old school company, been around, good people. So the business president, which is a little odd, brought me in from a small business unit to the biggest business unit to drive digital transformation before it was called digital transformation. So, how do we?
Yeah. I want to stop you there for a second, because you said something interesting, because a lot of my customers, my audience, my listeners, they're going to say, wait, they were already using spreadsheets. They were already digitally transformed.
Yeah. Well, it's funny.
Which is funny, because I don't consider Excel spreadsheets as a digital platform, which I know that's silly to say because it's all digits. But all I did was take paper and created the same thing on a computer. To me, that's not real digital transformation.
It is not. And Darren, it was funny when I joined, they came to me and it was, and I've done a lot of transformation, and it was always like, we've already figured this out. We've already done this. We've tried it. It failed. But what they came to me is like, oh no, we've already pinpointed exactly when we deliver features and functionality. And they broke out a spreadsheet that had a nice Gantt chart, had all these things. And I just said, how accurate has that been? How flexible.
I have to laugh because I've done that myself. I mean, come on.
Yeah,
Because
I used
that's
to
what
call it.
executives like. They like pretty slides with Gantt charts, right?
Yeah.
But as soon as it's done, it's out of sync with reality.
And even what's done, because a lot of times done is we finish the features. And how many times have you seen massive projects, and we'll talk about a few, where they completed the Gantt chart, maybe even completed the Gantt chart on time, but to do that, they cut back this, they cut back that. And when they finished, they didn't actually solve any of the business objectives because their goals were all wrong. But anyway, so I came in there. I actually brought Andy Jassy. So Amazon, they hadn't gone to the cloud, brought Andy Jassy in, got all of the global CIOs in a room. And Andy and I talked about what modern software development looks like. It's kicked off a $160 million cloud migration that now, is one of the big AWS talking points. One of the tools that I brought in was a thing called New Relic. So I was a big believer in digital transformation. One of the things you want to do is make sure your developers understand the customer experience. And if you think about companies that really haven't got there, customer complaints go to customer service and they filter down and your software breaks. It's not that great. But if you put, whether it be Datadog, New Relic, these type of tools, you could do that. So I brought that in. That's one of the things I'd done at Cox. And then New Relic said, hey, listen, you really understand how to do this with enterprise and enterprise transformation. And that's what we think our tool is. Would you come join us? And so I joined at New Relic and would fly to all of the companies, Disney, IBM, talking about transformation. How do you get your technology teams more connected to your customers? So fun stuff. And, then did some other things in incident management, a company called Blameless as a VC funded. So really just been in a lot of transformation. Right now I'm in an AI company, which I think, and I know maybe we could talk about that a little bit, is going to be one of the next biggest changes. And I think it's actually be more impactful than the internet.
I totally agree. But let's hold off on talking about that because let's save that for the end. Otherwise, we'll run out of, we won't get to the core foundation. To me, you've got an interesting perspective because you have been at the center of a lot of digital transformations. And I have too. And it's a tough spot to be in. It's exciting, but also sometimes you come in and people are like, I'm not changing. Right. And you're bringing change. You're bringing something that could disrupt their day-to-day lives. And like we're seeing right now with Doge, what Doge is doing to US government, it's all about change. Whether you like it or not, it doesn't matter. It's all about change and disruption. And a lot of times when you're a change agent like you and myself, it is disruptive. So how do you prevent that disruption from destruction?
I think that's good. I think, and also how do you make it successful? Because you've got the destruction, but you've also got the resistance, right?
The resistance, right? Because you and I both know when I do change, the improvement doesn't go like this. It goes like this. It goes down first as people are adjusting, and then your productivity skyrockets. But you got to get through that chasm, that big dip that happens right after. How do you manage that the dip's not too deep?
So I don't know if you've seen like the Kubler curve. That's one of my favorite graphics. If I came into a leadership team, is I just show them, and a lot of times they haven't seen it. And I'm like, all right, you are somewhere on this line. And so as the leaders of this transformation, our goal, just like you said, is to minimize this dip. And so, what do you do about that? And I would say, like, for me, I think that first of all, it starts with philosophy. So be clear on where you're going. And I even use this in my life, like where, why, and then be really clear. Is it critical? Like, in other words, is this a must or is this a should? Even in business, I think you do this in life. So where, why, and then the how. Because I think human beings don't like change, right? We're just hardwired. We don't like change. If we've seen previous people fail, because a lot of people do fail in transformation. A lot of time there is the 3 people back that tried something and didn't do it. But I think if you get clear of why, what this where looks like, let me paint this picture of this new and exciting future and how you're part of it. Because that's the other part. If that future looks like they're not part of it, that's pretty
Yeah,
scary.
yeah.
And then the why, and then so forth. Like, when I was at Cox, one of the things we would do is we were, the operations team, we were consolidating those and DevOps, and you think about microservices and all those kind of things. And so I would fly to a business unit that had this traditional ops team that were Linux administrators and moving to the cloud. And I was very clear. Listen, this company is moving to the cloud, where this company is moving to a DevOps and SRE, start reliability engineer structure. And the good news with Cox is we're going to give you an opportunity to learn those new skills. But I'm going to tell you, this is happening not just here, but everywhere. So you pay attention because you want to learn those skills, and just kind of painting that picture and making sure they understand that if they need to embrace that, it was actually in their vested interest to do that, because change was coming here and other places.
So yeah, so that brings up another interesting point. Change is coming. So I've got to help my organization get ready for that change because it may be thrust upon us.
Right.
And if I'm standing flat-footed, what happens?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that's where I go back to that where, why, and then is it a must or should? Because some of these things, if your company doesn't change, you're going to have huge issues. You're going to lose competitive position. Maybe you've already, and I could talk about some specific examples if
Well, yeah,
that's
let's
helpful.
talk. I mean, one of the most famous ones that we all know is Kodak.
Yeah, no,
Very
Kodak's a great
famous.
example. Yeah, where it had this huge opportunity, it didn't change. I'll give you an example like firsthand. So when I went to New Relic, great company, great people, great culture, but there was kind of a view, and this happens often. There was the view of the sales team. Here's what we needed to be competitive. The product team had a different view of here's what we need to be competitive. The business people had a different view of how this would be competitive. And the engineering team is like, guys, I'm not getting anything done because you guys keep changing your mind.
Yeah.
And
So you're
so what went
thrashing.
on, and so what would happen is for like 2 or 3 years, there really wasn't any major features released. And that allowed competitors to come into the market and really change things. So as I was sharing when I was at New Relic, I was in the field, I was talking to lots of customers. It was really clear to me what we need to do, what were the key features. And I would write up this little report from the field. And Lou Cerny, who's a really great CEO of the company, really great guy, he reached out and said, hey, Ken, I really believe in what you're saying, and I want to change to a general manager model. So you think about many companies, they're organized like engineering's in this silo, products in this silo, businesses in this silo, and there's no real connective tissue. So there's a lot of thrashing, right? And there's different ways to do that. So the general manager model is really popular on the West Coast. Is like, let's put like a business person and make them accountable for the sales numbers. And then, you can do what they call dotted lines or hard lines, as far as how the organizational structure. And so I went through and did that transformation with New Relic into the general manager model, put a structure in place to get all of the sales team and everybody aligned. This is the most important things we need to do, quarterly plan. And it was great. And I two stories with that. As I remember first when I said that, everybody told me, we've already tried this, we can't do it, all that stuff. I'm like, yes, we're going to do it. It's going to happen. I remember, fast forward a little bit later, that guy coming up to me and he's like, Ken, I didn't believe we could ever get that much done. But because in 8 months, we released more features that customers loved. I remember I was at the cab and Disney came up. You guys have delivered Capital One. You've delivered more in the last 8 months than you have
So
in the last 3 years.
so it wasn't just shuffling the chairs on the deck of the Titanic,
Yes.
right? It wasn't just that because you had to do because they'd already done it sometime before,
Yes.
right? So what was different this time? Because you had the same organizational structure change to a matrix West Coast management
Mhm.
style. So what did you do different this time than they did previous times?
Well, they actually didn't have that matrix. So when I came in, they had the silo, the typical,
Right.
products over here, CTOs. And so there was no connective tissue. There was no connective tissue between those people. I know you and I talked about this yesterday, because I always say when you come into it, it's people, process, and technology. So
Right.
when I first came into that, we fired a few people right off the bat. So there were some people that weren't connected with the change that we were going to do, which was
Okay,
tough.
I'm glad you brought that up because this is a key foundation to change. And it sounds brutal,
Yeah.
but I've noticed it in my own life when I've come in and tried to make change. If I did not root out the culture keepers, the people that would not change and wanted things to stay the same, they torpedoed every single change I tried to make. And it wasn't on purpose. It's just, I like things the way they are. And even if they were overtly doing it, which some were, others were subliminally doing it by, I'm not happy with the way this is going. I'm going to drag my feet. I'm going to be slow. So
Disagree and subvert.
yeah. So you've got to move them aside, find them another job somewhere else, right? Or you put them in a box. I've done the put in the box. The problem is sometimes people let them out of the box, and you can't let that happen. So I agree with you here. When you're making fundamental changes to culture, you need to root out the culture keepers and get rid of them. They have to go. And that sounds brutal, but in order for an organization to make that change, that has to happen.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's where you really clear where you're going and then who wants to be on part of it.
Who wants to be on that ship?
They're not on the ship for where we're going. That's totally fine. We all have choices of where we work, but this is where the company's going. And then I think as a leader to have, to state that confidence, this is where we're going. That is going to happen. It's not an if, it's a must. It's not a should. Because then that also, I think, weeds out people that don't have the confidence or, any of those type of issues. And then, you were hitting also in process. So going back to even planning and that is there was no connective tissue to really truly prioritize across those different functions what is most important. And so in that transformation, one of the things we said is, okay, here's our quarterly plan. And we said, we're going to leave a X amount of capacity to do just whatever pops in. But the big part of what was really critical that we all agreed as a company, this is protected. So anybody at a low level can make a decision on, say, 20% of capacity just to kind of build whatever, some new idea pops in, great, go. But for those key things, nobody can change it unless it went to an escalation meeting. And so literally at the top of the company, we would be there with the other leaders because, okay, this means that we're going to change one of those things that we all agreed 3 months ago was super important. And so let's make sure it's a purposeful change. And so that really also stopped the thrashing of we got to close this deal for $3 million. Let's stop doing this, because in the longer term, that's where we miss the big.
That's where we need to go. So, Ken, I'll be honest with you. You put some bureaucracy in place, right? So where's that sweet balance between too much process and not enough process? Because I've seen it work both ways, right? Where, all right, now I put a change control board in. Now I can't be flexible enough to do what I need to do to stay competitive.
Totally agree.
Well, I see big companies they get crushed by bureaucracy. And then you also have big companies that it's the Wild West and nothing gets done, right? So how do you know when to dial that up and down? And is it harder to dial it back down once you've created a process that you've got people to buy into?
So I'd say, first of all, it probably helps if you had experience. So I'll go back to Cox, for example. They had the traditional cab. And so the talk about everything doesn't get done, hard to get anything approved. That's what it was. And so I was in the process and was part of the dismantling of that traditional cab, but also keeping the safeguards in, because we had contractual agreements, we had, legal things we had to, so putting the right level of process in. And the thing I was telling you about with New Relic, it was, listen to what the problem. So what's the problem? The problem is the sales team, because of market demands, is constantly changing their mind. And so we're constantly thrashing, and no one's realizing that constant change when you're, especially in development, is expensive. And it's okay to do it, but just be purposeful of the cost. So when we talk about that process, we gave the ability to make any decision at the lower level, as long as it didn't impact these bigger things that we all agreed was super, super important. And then when it came, it was a very light process. Hey, why is that more valuable? What's the trade-off? Do we make a decision? And we made a decision in that call. So it was, when that call happens, it's not going to be, we're going to go study it again for 3 weeks. So we could pivot very, very quickly with 1 week. What was interesting is once we put that in process, we had a lot of quote escalations. And then once we were talking through the business, we had less. And the ones that we came to it, because there was leaders on the call and we're making a decision on that call, it became a lot easier. And I've actually used this playbook in other companies, very similar success.
Well, I like how you said they made the decision on the call. That is key, right? When you put these boards in place or where you put these guardrails in place, if you haven't empowered someone to actually make a decision, it can stall you. In fact, we run into that problem in large corporations. I have, as
Hmm.
an individual contributor and as a CIO, where I've learned over the years, and someone really smart articulated it for me, an Admiral Fritzmeier, right, who's a good friend of mine. He said, you need to find the person that can say yes, because everyone can say no,
Hmm.
but you need the person that can say yes. I went, wow, that's profound, right? Because anyone can say, no, we're not going to do that. But the person that says yes is putting their skin in the game a little bit. So in these control boards, or when you start having these things, you need to empower someone that can say yes and is accountable for that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And because again, most people, that's why I like to take it to business terms, because I think a lot of the debates are the tactics. So wait, hold on.
Yeah,
What
you're right.
what business thing are we trying to accomplish? Because I've over my life, like most of the times, the intense debates is the tactics. And so I always say, like, all right, what business we're trying to do? We're going to launch this thing. Like we need to launch a competitive logging product. Okay, and so then when this new thing comes in, is this new thing more valuable than our competitive logging product? Yes or no? And then we get out of the tactics, it becomes a little bit easier.
No, that makes sense. All right, so that's a good one. So let's talk a little bit about the elephant in the room. The biggest change I think we will ever see is generative AI and what that is doing to organizations as far as change. This one, if you're sticking your head in the sand saying, we're not going to do generative AI, you're going to get steamrolled by some 20 something year old with a couple buddies that just created a new company that rolled right over the top of you. Do you think the same thing? That's kind of what I'm thinking.
I absolutely believe it. It's going to be transformative everywhere. And it's funny because some just go about a little about AI in particular. People feel like AI just came on the scene, 2.5 years ago. You and I both know, like I was doing
Been
AI for the
around a
last
long
7 years. I did it at
Yeah.
New Relic, I did it at another company, but I do think that people are starting to realize it's impactful. But they still haven't got. Some people still think it's a technology thing again. You think about it, it's like it's the same thing as cloud. Cloud's a technology. No, it's a reforming of the whole way you do it. Microservices, it's a reforming, and generative AI is going to touch every single
Everything.
part of your business.
Yep.
I totally agree. And people, like, I think where some companies are starting to have like a chief AI administrator, that may be a way to get there, because you're going to move more cheese, and people don't like that, right? In AI transformations than I think in any other transformations that have happened today.
So we talked a little bit earlier about when you're going through digital transformation, if people feel like they're threatened about their jobs, they will drag, right?
Hmm.
Because it's about their livelihood, right? Gen AI fits right in there. A lot of people are scared they're going to lose their jobs. They're scared that they're going to be replaced and become irrelevant.
Hmm.
So, what do I do with those people? Do I just get rid of them?
Well, I think that's a great question. So I'd say, like, first of all, I would say in AI in its current state, it's really the collection of all of our thoughts as human beings, right? They've just put it all in a big computer, try to mimic in some ways the way the brain works.
Right.
And it is not good at original thoughts. There was a Harvard business study where they put a bunch of executives, I don't remember if it's Colgate or somebody, but they said, make an adjacent product, don't talk to any humans, just work with an AI. I forgot which one, if it was Claude or ChatGPT. And when they came back and presented, 80% of the solutions were very, very similar,
Of
because
course. Yeah.
AI is all just taking what already was out there. So it's going to lead you to the same paths with the same inputs, generally speaking, unless you've got it in super creative mode, and then you might get false answers. So I think to me is that AI is here to help us all be more efficient. Now, for many of us, that just means that one human can do more and accomplish more. And I think, again, stop doing a lot of, I call, the low value work. I think one of the things that's really interesting is, like, map your high value things that you enjoy and you think are good use of your time and your mind, and then map low value. And I would say for the vast majority, the low value work is the stuff that I think AI is going to take out. Now, there's certain positions like customer service that, like I don't know what the future of customer service, like, I think that that's a tough spot. Like, I think that, what that's going to do, because it's perfect for AI. And there may
Yeah.
be other ones, but for the vast majority of people, it's going to be something that's really going to empower you, not replace you.
Well, we saw the same thing with the internet revolution, right? And it took decades, though, for it to happen. Email. I still remember. I see. I when I started my career, I started with email. I
Mhm.
started in the '90s. I had it early on in college, so I never understood. But I had some coworkers. I was about 5 years after email become
Mhm.
proliferated in the mid '90s. But a lot of my coworkers, when I started my career, had recorders that they would send their recorders to have things typed up for them,
Mhm.
right? Still in the early 90s. And we had inboxes and outboxes sitting on our cubes. We had those until the mid 2000s. So the old paper way of doing things, sending memos around to people instead of via email, email was more casual, memos were more official. Those sorts of things took a decade or longer to work.
Mhm.
Gen AI, it's moving so fast. I think it's going to leave some people behind. And I've had people on my show talk about this before. It's either going to create a chasm, but it's also going to level the playing field because it's so new. So this one's a big dilemma. And how do I, as a business owner, how do I leverage generative AI to help me get my products out faster at a lower cost and also keep my good employees? That's a challenge.
Yeah, and what I've seen is successful, and I've done some work with different private equity companies. And I'll hit on one thing that's interesting is it used to be from an investment thesis that SaaS companies were amazing because oftentimes it might take years to develop the software. So part of the moat was the economic investment and the intellectual capital
Right.
to build this proprietary software. But what people are seeing is that now a startup with half the staff, a fourth of the money, can actually take an existing idea and build something very, very competitive with it for a fraction of the cost. So I'm seeing, like, with some of the private equity companies I work with, where they're like, what's our AI strategy across the board? And with like engineering, I'm seeing if they do it right, it's literally for every 3 developers, they get another developer effectively in throughput. So I think you're going to see everybody do that. And then again, if you don't embrace it and your competitors do, they're going to
You're
be able to
toast.
deliver a better customer experience. They're going to have better data on why their customers are buying or selling. Because I think at the end of the day, it drives efficiency in the customer experience and it drives efficiency in your employees.
So you mentioned the high value, low value
Yeah.
aspect. So as a company, I have to look at high value. What do people value and focus just on that? All the other stuff that support this, I'm going to be looking more and more towards Gen AI to support the real value that my customers are wanting. Is that kind of the direction to go?
Yeah, my opinion is that is the direction to go. Is so you think about, like, let's think about hotels. Like, you and I've traveled a lot, right? I'm
Oh
sure
yeah, yeah,
in years. Like when I did like 200,000 miles. But think about how many times we've gone into a hotel where we're standing there and they're spending gazillion time because they've got some really tough system that checks us
yeah,
in.
yeah. There's like I can't get the system to do this right.
Right.
Yeah,
But it's just checking us in. Whereas they could have been interacting with me and giving me a great experience because we can remove that friction from that experience. And so I think that's where you're going to see, and you're going to see it everywhere. I think even in small to medium sized businesses, think about how many times do we go into business that we once loved, we have a bad experience, we don't say anything unless we really hate it, we go to Google reviews. That's a great thing. Like AI can pick up those trends and there's so many impacts you're going to see, and it's just starting. Obviously, medium enterprise, that's who's really investing in it. And I think they'll see some of the biggest wins. It actually makes me positive net on the stock market too, because I think it's going to make all businesses much more efficient.
well, and that's very interesting. It means that we can focus on human to human interaction even more,
Right.
right? And a lot of people think that's going to replace it. In fact, I have someone else coming on my show that's talking about a Gen AI to be your companion when you don't have one,
Mhm.
and to combat loneliness. I actually think that Gen AI is going to free us up to be able to do more human to human interaction, but still get all the services that we had before.
I
It's going to
agree.
be an interesting time.
We used to do it like pens down, keyboards down, heads up. You're talking to your customer.
Yeah.
You're experiencing, because even for us as humans, like we are humans. And again, AI is not currently, at least, great at original thought. So we're still the creators of new ideas and innovation. It can just help us speed along that process with, capturing derivative works or, little small
Well,
solutions.
it's a great brainstorm. It's a great team brainstormer, right?
Yeah,
I
totally.
find when I work with it deeply, it pulls things out of me that I haven't been able to articulate very well. So to me, you're right. The original thoughts are still coming from me. It's helping me get them out in a more consumable manner. So
Yeah, and you'll be able to educate it more about you, who you are, how you
yeah.
think. So I'm sure you've done the same thing, like the ChatGPT's memory function. You have that, and then it becomes pretty good. Like sounding like you, bringing in other parts that
Oh
you don't
yeah,
have to keep
yeah.
referencing. It's really
In
amazing.
fact, I trained up in AI. Not trained it. I using prompts. I do a newscast every week, and I changed it from me reading the news to my wife and I having a conversation about the news.
Right.
All generated by AI, and it captured my wife's personality and my personality. After listening to our own podcast, it came up with profiles on our personalities, and now I feed it back in, and now it reads the news as if it's on our podcast. It's brilliant, right? We're still giving it the concepts and what we want to talk about, and it's coming up with the scripts and everything. It's pretty cool, I have to say.
And you know what's great about generative AI too is it's helping people in all kinds of ways that aren't even written. Like you and I focus on business, but I'll share a little personal story. So I have a son that has some learning disabilities, and he's 27 now, and he was really just starting to do really, really great. He was living in another state. And what I found, and never told him to do this, is he found ChatGPT, and now he uses it to like, hey, what should I do about this? How often should I change my? Well, it's super patient with him, unlike humans, right? And it's been like one of the best
Yes,
things
you're
ever.
right.
He
Yeah.
uses it even for news, like, hey, what's going on with this? Because now ChatGPT reads the internet, and so like it's amazing for people. And I think as you get voice, you've seen about like the streaming voice is the new
Yeah.
API they're rolling out that I think they're on the front, where you literally can interrupt it, and so then you can have full conversation. Think about how many more things that's going to open up. Think about if we walk into a restaurant, like the details of the order, that's not where the interaction is. So like we just say, hey, I want a Big Mac, I want fries, this, that, and the other. It already knows what all the options are. So every time it asks me that, I say, that's great. Okay, we've got your order. And then maybe the person by the counter has a time to like, hey, thanks for coming here, and, get that
Yeah,
personal
to interact. Hey, how are the kids? Did they win their soccer game this week? That builds that relationship. I hope that's the direction it goes, Ken. I really do. I hope that we don't lose our humanity through this. That
Yep.
we engage more in humanity. So, hey, Ken, this has been great talking to you on the show. If people want to find out more about Ken, where do they find out more about you and your digital transformation journey?
Sure. Well, if you want more help on that, if you have any questions, you just go to kengavranovic.com, KenGavranovic.com. And then I actually have an AI company that we're doing some stuff in small and medium-sized business. It's productgenius.guru. And that's where you could see AI really coming in and understanding the patterns of businesses and literally emailing it to the owner and telling them what you need staffing on this time at 4:00 on Wednesdays. You have this issue. It's really amazing. So really, Darren, thank you so much for having me on the show.
Oh, hey, thanks for coming on. I appreciate your time.
All right, take care.
Thank you for listening to Embracing Digital Transformation today. If you enjoyed our podcast, give it 5 stars on your favorite podcasting site or YouTube channel. You can find out more information about Embracing Digital Transformation at embracingdigital.org. Until next time, go out and embrace the digital revolution.